the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact. Sustainability really means to business. Welcome back, Doug.
Okay, thanks, Div. So this is my third time up at bat, so I should be getting pretty good at it.
Yeah.
So we had this intro slide. Divs gave you some of my background. I would just build on the second bullet there that I've worked in the environmental field since 1975, long before it was fashionable, and it gives me a unique basis to go through the subject matter in this presentation, how things have changed over time and what some of the success stories have been, and we'll go into those. So I'm happy to send you an Acrobat copy of this presentation. You can email me or contact me through the website and we'll send you a copy. So what does sustainability really mean to business? The word sustainability gets thrown around an awful lot. They've even got a program at Stevens with that name. So sustainability's impact and needs vary widely on the different issues and its impact on business. So what I'm going to address in this presentation is a handful of key areas related to sustainability: consumer sentiment, in a series of environmental items, what I call the so-called political pollutants, the massive anti-plastic movement that's going on right now, and I'm going to delve into what is an interesting success story in hazardous waste generation. Also going to cover extended producer responsibility, which is packaging related, recycling related, and maybe a not so new thing, but one that's gaining real speed: environmental justice. I'm going to talk about greenwashing and the marketing aspects of sustainability, and then a little bit about legal aspects, and then talk about sustainability issues across the business cycle. So sustainability in the consumer. So the bottom line is the consumer is very diverse when it comes to sustainability views. But that's not stopping companies to try and appeal to consumer sentiment on sustainability. It's figuring out what the consumer thinks and fitting your sustainability product, message, service to the consumer. And the big bottom line, it tends to be cost versus sustainability attributes. So this slide shows consumer attitudes versus behavior. And this looks at that issue of how important sustainability is as a driver for purchasing behavior. And you can see on the far left that paying a fair price still tends to win out the day, and availability and what brand it is, or availability and price are the biggest. Brand and where it's made is secondary. Sustainability is kind of in the third group right now, and how unique it is a fourth group. However, the sustainability numbers have been increasing quite a bit over the last 5 years, and a lot of consumers talk the talk, but when asked about attitudes, price, value, and product benefits are still very important. And this survey was done in 2022, and it's been changing dramatically almost every year. So where are these consumers in terms of sustainability, consumer segments? And I guess it's not like other things. If you look at voting patterns, if you look on the left here, 15% of the activists who really see environmental changes, sustainability as their responsibility. And then you have a fairly large group called the pragmatists. They're concerned about their actions, but they low cost and home-oriented things are important to, but they'll compromise on that. And then they're kind of the center group of the busy bystanders. They're unwilling to change their routines, and their primary barrier is convenience rather than price. And then the conflicted contributors, their financial situation takes priority, and they're unlikely to weigh sustainability benefits over cost. And then the disengaged denialists, sometimes we call them the Browns, they don't care about the environment, and nothing's going to change their view on that. So you can see pretty large buckets in each category. But the retail brand owners are committed to sustainability, and all 25 of the world's largest consumer packaging good people and retailers have goals to increase recycled content, minimize packaging, and increase reusable packaging. And they're all working towards fairly significant goals with a lot of focus on the plastics area. And we're going to go into that a little bit on what I call the anti-plastic movement. So the political pollutants, it's a coined phrase that's used occasionally. And most of these materials were designed not to degrade readily in the environment. They're persistent. Their applications were such that inertness and long life were important factors. Another thing that makes a political pollutant, it should have a well-known detrimental environmental or human health impact. And as I mentioned earlier, these applications were developed for long life, which works against them. I always, when I talk about chlorine, I say, chlorine is our friend and our foe. Without chlorine, we'd have difficulty with our drinking water, although you can use ozone and other materials. They're not quite as impact. But chlorine, chlorinated organics are high problematic materials when it comes to environmental or human health. And these political pollutants quickly become larger than life. And I'm now starting to see the social media impact to this one, and especially in PFAS. And we'll talk about PFAS in some details. And these pollutants are the targets of many class action lawsuits. And we'll talk about legal aspects in class action lawsuits because they're important drivers. So some of the well-known political pollutants, asbestos was one of the early ones. PCBs certainly go back a while, and tetrachlorodioxins, chlorinated hydrocarbons, then the fluorocarbons, and one of the more recent ones is talcum powder, which allegedly contained asbestos content. And just in the last few weeks, Johnson & Johnson's been putting forward a $9 billion settlement for people who use talcum powder. And in a lot of these settlements, there's very little need to show impact. So the most recent, what I call political pollutants, is PFAS, dubbed the forever chemicals, and they're polyfluorinated substances. Many broad applications, firefighting foam, their grease resistance barrier made them valuable in packaging, and they're inert and slippery. And while that adds to their application usability, it causes problems in terms of environmental. And the US EPA recently proposed standards for 6 types, and they're expanding the list. And 2 types they originally promised to regulate under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And the proposed rule limit is 4 parts per trillion for PFOS and POA. And the EPA has said they should be regulated at the lowest reliable measurement level because they're likely carcinogens. And the implications of the rule are massive. And as I was chatting with Dibbs, he's the recipient of a recent award project to examine what I call an innovative green remediation option. So Stevens is right in the forefront on this one. So the anti-plastic movement, it's a steamroller. It's unbelievable the general consumer's negative opinion of plastics, and it's gained momentum because the average person has a fear of synthetic organic chemicals, and they don't know they're surrounded by organic chemicals all the time, and everything we do and eat is organic. But that's when I talk about greenwashing, I'll talk about the word organic. So plastics are a magnificent packaging material, and their basis, which is multi-material, barrier properties, and lightweight, that work in their favor for packaging, work against them in recycling. And one of the latest approaches has been called chemical recycling, where mixed plastics are cracked back to monomers or fuel. And this especially works in areas where there's a lot of barriers and multiple layers and things like that, that you can't recycle it back to its polymer. For example, if you got high density polyethylene, you can recycle that back to the polymer. If you've got PET, polyethylene terephthalate, plastic bottles, you can go back. But if you have mixtures of polystyrene and polypropylene and a number of other ones, you can't get them back to flake. So proposed to chemical recycling, but the environmental activist community is pushing back because they see it as not recycling. And again, a piece of it in my mind is this fear of chemicals. And the question out there now is this waste management or is this manufacturing? And plastic pollution is really a lot more about littering, but that aspect receives minimal attention. How does all the plastics wind up in the water? Because people throw them around indiscriminately. And the oil, chemical, and plastics industry are spending multi-billions of dollars to try and push back on the anti-plastic fervor on many fronts. How successful will they be, and how much cost will it add to plastics packaging is a real unknown. And they've been fighting a losing battle. And right now, the U.S. Congress is actually debating limiting the production of virgin plastics because of the anti-plastic movement. And this is a copied slide, so you may not be able to see it real well, but this is a recent consumer survey comparing paper packaging to plastic packaging. And over 90% of the people said they somewhat agree or strongly agree that paper packaging is better than plastics. I mean, that's an overwhelming result. So hazardous waste generation, I call it a successful sustainability story. I'm going to walk you a little bit through the generation of hazardous waste for over 45 years. So prior to 1976, hazardous waste were not regulated any differently at the federal level than any other waste materials. Many states had separate regulations for industrial and hazardous waste. But the Resource Conservation Recovery Act in the late 70s changed all that. And when that act went into effect, hazardous waste disposal costs went up as much as 250% in the late 1970s. Well, faced with those costs, the generators quickly learned about how to not make the worst in the first place, and that was the economical answer for them. And significant efforts at recycling hazardous waste materials, both for material value and energy, and especially manufacturing process changes, we call that source reduction, were implemented over a 10+ year period, greatly reducing the volume of hazardous waste generation. And disposal by either landfilling or incineration of hazardous waste, not including wastewater, but solids and other liquid hazardous waste per pound of product produced in the US declined 90% from 1976 to 2020. So in this category of waste, the sustainability story is a very good one, and it's a good model for approaching other environmental areas. So here's the steps that I saw take place on hazardous waste generation, and it kind of serves as a model. You define the hazard or the environmental or human impact, which is usually easier said than done, because our ability to measure pollutants is down to, we're getting to the molecule by molecule level, and our ability to assess environmental and human health impacts at that level is often questionable. And that's where a lot of the fight and the debate takes place. So once you've got the hazard defined, then you set an environmental standard based on that above step. And then the management costs, disposal, treatment, recycling, and source reduction will follow through market forces. Like with hazardous waste, when the disposal costs went way up, people said, let's not make this stuff or let's recycle it. And the proper end result will come to fruition. People are not making those wastes. And at one time, the offsite hazardous waste industry thought that treatment and disposal would be a huge business, and didn't turn out that way because people stopped making it. And the management on-site and manufacturing facilities, recycling and processing changes, source reduction, made the offsite hazardous waste management business decline for 30 years. So extended producer responsibility. What is it? EPR is the abbreviation we use for it. EPR programs are where brand owners, retailers, and sellers of goods are responsible to package these materials in packaging that's recyclable, and effectively it's going to use a tax system that penalizes hard to recycle items. It got its start in Europe. The first major country was Germany's Green Dot program. Most of the Canadian provinces now have EPR, and 4 US states last year adopted EPR: Maine, Oregon, California, and Colorado. Another dozen states have active legislation in their state houses, and more will follow. So it's going to be very widespread. I forget where I have New Jersey in here. I'm sure New Jersey is going to be in the next batch. So the precursors to EPR were bottle deposit systems, lead acid battery, and tire recycling disposal fees. You know, if you buy a new set of tires, there's a fee built in to help those tires get reused. Lead acid batteries have a value associated with them, and the recycling of those are very high. So like many environmental laws, once a critical mass of states have adopted EPR, the brand owners and retailers will push for a national unified program. They don't want to have to comply with 35 different state laws. A good example of this was automobile emission laws, which after a number of states adopted them in the late 60s and 1970s, led by California, the laws and controls were eventually implemented nationally. However, California still has their own standards that are more stringent. And there's been a lot of back and forth legal action over that. You know, should you have to make it a separate internal combustion engine car for California? EPR is a new phenomenon that's only fully emerged in the last few years, and how it will play out is yet to be seen. The devil's in the detail of EPR. So, relatively new as a legal construct, environmental justice, as we say, EJ, is only a few years old, but does have some history. And these laws, which are spreading kind of like EPR, are meant to protect low-income communities and communities who have been historically subjected to a disproportionately high number of environmental and public health stressors. The main issue is the many definitions of environmental justice, and you can see a common thread. The definitions and the structure, and all the states implementing EJ right now have different definitions, and they vary widely. And again, the implications of environmental justice are very far-reaching. They can be used in many non-scientific ways to attempt to alter manufacturing, waste treatment, disposal, and in many ways, possibly all aspects of our society. They're also closely related to community organizing movements. And New Jersey has just passed one of the first EJ laws in 2020, and it's just starting to be implemented. It's a rapidly growing movement that has all the makings of a slippery slope. It grew out of what we call LULUs, locally unwanted land usages, and NIMBY, not in my backyard. LULUs and NIMBYs have been applied to things like landfills, prisons, wastewater treatment plants, group homes, halfway houses, power plants, many manufacturing operations, police stations, and the list goes on. So it'll be interesting to see where the whole EJ, Lulu, and NIMBY thing wind up. And there's a curious natural factor. If you look around, and I use North America as an example, but this exists elsewhere because of our gravitational pull. You know, one of the natural factors affecting waste treatment facilities like wastewater treatment plants are that most rivers in the Northern Hemisphere flow south, and the treatment plants are frequently located on the south side of the city. I think there's only one major river in North America that goes north. So the Lulus tended to be grouped on the south side of the city because that's where the water flowed, and you don't want to have to pump your wastewater uphill. There's some extreme examples. Again, California or out on the left coast has had all the makings of EJ for a while on land uses. Berkeley, California is an extreme example. I had a lady there tell me she had to get a permit for painting the fence in front of her house along the sidewalk. And a homeless person who was living on the sidewalk didn't like the color, and they denied her permit for 2 years until she picked a color that he would like. And that's kind of the extreme example of environmental justice. And the EPA just has an annual funding of $108 million for the EJ program, and it's just getting started. So the zero waste movement and environmental justice have a lot of commonalities. Because many of those places where incinerators or landfills or waste treatment are are cited are also communities of color and low income. And in 2021, there were 150 bills in the United States in state legislature relating to EJ. Some states, I mentioned there's some history here, like New York has had environmental justice language since the 1980s, but it's moving into to a very new movement. And in 2021, Bloomberg reported that 10 states had codified EJ with another 13 pending. And again, we're working out all the standards on definitions and standards in a service provider's area that is becoming increasingly important amidst this trend. And I suspect we'll again see probably we'll wind up with one federal codified legislation and regulation for environmental justice. So greenwashing, kind of a bit of a subject on the other side that I mentioned earlier. And I say no presentation on sustainability is complete without discussion of greenwashing. So what is greenwashing? Greenwashing is misleading claims of sustainability issues with regard to products and services. And this approach is used to send a feel-good message to consumers, regardless of the true sustainability attributes of a product or service. And I mentioned kind of one precursor example was the confusing example of what are organic foods. And it was in the first 5 years in the movement of selling organic food, it was you could call anything organic. There were no standards. And it took years to create the standards of what an organic food really is. And again, most people don't really understand that they're surrounded by organic chemicals, and they are organic chemicals themselves. So another form of greenwashing is things like plastic bag recycling at groceries. Bloomberg in Singapore recently did a test. If you go to a grocery, you can take your plastic grocery bags if they're still legal in your state, which I don't think they're legal in New Jersey anymore, but you could put them into a container outside the store, and they were presumably going to be recycled. Well, Bloomberg reporter put 5 Apple baggage tags on groups of bags and put them in these bins, and none of them wound up being recycled. They all wound up in landfills and incinerators in Singapore. And when she went back and questioned the stores, they said, well, we have an inspector who inspects it, and if he sees any contamination in there, he discards it. They call him a sorter, but if he sees any contamination, he's supposed to throw it away. So that's a form of greenwashing. People think that those bags are getting recycled, and very, very few of them actually get recycled. And the good news is that states are going after product limiting labeling claim issues. And again, starting on the West Coast, California, Oregon have really taken on some of the retailers. An example was Keurig. Keurig pods were starting to put labels that their pods were recyclable, and all he did was have to peel off the aluminum and then take out the coffee grounds and compost the coffee grounds and then get that little aluminum pod into a recycling operation, which it's a different aluminum alloy than aluminum cans. And California fined him $10 million and made him take the recyclability claim off the package. So on the bigger picture of things, Wall Street's gotten involved in the ESG play, and there was a lot of controversy floating around, which over the last few months. And I picked the green bonds. You can finance different operations with potentially green bonds. And if you look at this chart over the years, when it first got started out, these bonds actually had pretty hard and fast green promises. Well, the orange line is the disclaimer of having a green promise. And in 2021, that passed. And the recent discussion was really kind of crazy. It was like thinking that mutual funds would have to take into account ESG, and it's really that they can take it into account, and they can bring out the ESG attributes, and then you could decide on your investments that way. But this just kind of shows how the money, this is a money greenwashing issue. So other examples of greenwashing, bioplastic cups. People think bioplastics are the answer, and for utensils and packaging, but they really don't degrade to any degree in the environment, and they're problematic because they're a contaminant in in plastics recycling, and they're also a contaminant in paper recycling. And compostable items are another one. Labeling something as compostable is a feel-good. Plates, cutlery, packages. But there are really very few commercial composting operations that exist to manage these, and only a small part of the population, probably half of that 15% on that first chart, have compost at home. So, in many ways, a modern solid waste landfill is a bioreactor. Almost all of the major ones recover methane from the anaerobic digestion that takes place, and that's certainly a way to recover energy value from materials that will compost. So legal issues, let's touch on the legal issues, because legal issues are inextricably linked with sustainability because of environmental health and human impact items. So feeding the frenzy, class action lawsuit proliferation. What we used to call ambulance chasers long ago, which were lawyers who followed ambulances for accidents, now have gone to advertising on TV on class action lawsuits. And every once in a while, people start talking about what's called tort reform to rein these in. But since the majority of people in the U.S. Congress are lawyers, we don't see that coming anytime. And I put a little graphic comparing lawyers versus engineers. In the U.S., we have one lawyer for every 248 people. We're number one in the world, and we have one engineer for 139. Germany, I was surprised that they were that high, but they have one engineer per 83 people and one lawyer per 516. And then you go to the other side of the world in Asia, where Japan and China have one lawyer per 3,000 and 4,500, and one engineer per 76. And China, the data is kind of lacking on engineers there, but some people think it's 25. It's probably less than 75, which would make them one of the most technocrat countries. And my last bullet is an interesting one that I think about occasionally. And if they weren't in wide use already, you could not bring gasoline onto the market today, and you could not bring alcoholic beverages into the market today. We have something that's called GRAS, generally regarded as safe, which was legislation that passed in the US in the 1920s. And what it did, it said, if these things were in commerce, that they're generally regarded as safe and they can continue to do so. Gasoline exposure, gasoline is a nasty material. It's highly volatile. It's complex organics, and it's got human health exposure. Every time you go to the gas station, you've got a chance of getting exposed to it, and that probably would not pass muster in today's market to bring it on. And ethanol is a carcinogen. If it wasn't on the market, you couldn't bring gin to the market today, or alcoholic beverages. You can bring variations of it. So sustainability in the business cycle. Capitalism, U.S. capitalism, and businesses in the business of making money. And we have business cycles. And most companies of any size have sustainability personnel. And the business cycle consists of peaks, growing and declining, and troughs, recessions. And most business cycles historically have been 5 to 7 years apart, but they certainly can be shorter. With the pandemic, we whipsawed through a business cycle of incredible proportions in just 2 years. And there have been other short cycles of 3 and 4 years. So I've watched about 8 business cycles, and in the downturns and troughs or recessions, items related to environmental and sustainability and the people assigned to those areas were some of the first to be furloughed over the first 20 years that I've been in the business. But over the last few cycles, we've seen quite a bit less of this. But an interesting survey of 250 CEOs talking about the impending recession, the majority still said the first areas that they would have job cuts would be sustainability and advertising. But it does vary by industry and how important environmental and sustainability are to their operations and customers. You won't see the oil industry, chemical, plastics industry cutting environmental and sustainability positions because they're so important to it. But for example, I've seen many cities go through a business cycle and their environmental people went by the wayside. But one thing that's really changed over 45 years is that the corporate values and individual company policies on sustainability have become almost or even more important than complying with laws and regulations. And this is, again, primarily on large and medium businesses. You don't see the same thing in small companies. So with that, I'll stop sharing and